Hey, how's it going? I'm so glad you clicked on this video today. This is going to be a breakdown of an original piece I wrote. It was just released as a video and audio single called Parallelephants. This is going to be the first video in a series that I'm going to consistently be working on called The Why of Blank. Basically, I kind of want to highlight some of the things that I really like about this piece and shed some light on some of the techniques and approaches that I use to put this thing together. So this is The Why of Parallelephants. If you haven't checked that out, it's linked below. But after seeing this, I'd encourage you to check it out again and just see if you hear anything in a different way. Anyways, let's jump in. In my time as a musician, I've found that one of the most effective strategies for me is to give myself some creative limits. Whether it's playing or writing, I find that forcing myself to be creative inside some kind of box usually leads to me creating strong work. Parallelephants was kind of a huge experiment in pushing that strategy to its limits. This piece has a sort of A Day in the Life by the Beatles kind of story behind it. It began as two separate ideas, which at a certain point I just felt complemented each other really well. I originally wrote this piece in 2017, and at that time I was really fascinated with the task of creating some music that was jazz-inspired or related, but wasn't really jazz. There's a lot behind that, being that before I ever took lessons or studied music seriously, I just wanted to play rock. And I really love classic rock. I always have. I find that like some Zeppelin kind of tendencies or Queen sort of tendencies always appear in my music, and I think this is super apparent here. So this opening section came from an idea I was originally imagining would be a song, but it also comes from my limitations at the piano. This opening phrase is sort of the extent of my pianistic coordination. What's most important to note in this section, though, is how there's minimal change from chord to chord. This leaves a lot of room on the back end to reinterpret that content into new contexts. Also, if we just briefly peek at the melody here, we can see how it just expands one idea. First it's C, D, G, and then C, D, G, A, etc. This is another technique I use all the time in harmony as well. I'll pick a chord voicing, or I'll sometimes call it a movable grip, that can fit into a lot of different contexts. In this case, C, D, G gives us a nice B flat 6-9 sound, but this can also be A flat major 7 sharp 11, or E flat 6-9, or A minor 11, right? We can call this plurality of function, basically meaning the C, D, G voicing can function in a lot of different ways. It's just a vague and nondescript sound. The piece gets to its next major section, which is a foreshadowing of what will be the shout chorus or ensemble climax towards the end of the piece. In this case, everything is coming out of the piano part, which again is a product of me sucking at the piano. This is one of the original one of two ideas I referenced in the beginning, and it follows suit with the minimal movement between chords concept. So before there was even any parallelephants or anything close to it, this section came out of me just trying to make something musical using only triads and by moving the voices no more than a step between each chord. Basically, each chord shares at least one note with the previous chord. In this case, C to A flat to F to D flat, to B flat, to F sharp, to A, to E. And then it just loops one more time. And just to make things more interesting, I put some C bombs underneath some of these chords just to create more theatrical tension. Everything happening on top of that progression exists to create forward and upward momentum. At this point, we're getting into the second major section of the piece, which came from the other exclusive idea that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. Again, the key here is creating boxes, parameters, limitations, whatever you want to call them. This was actually an assignment from my teacher at the time, who challenged me to come up with a few of those 3-note voicings or grips and see if I could create some logical musical material. Basically, there's 4 different ones. We have C, D, G, C sharp, F sharp, G sharp, E, F sharp, B, and C sharp, F sharp, F, or E sharp. So simply by changing the harmonic context that supports these structures, we can open ourselves up to a limitless black hole of possibilities, depending on how far you want to challenge your listener. This is a really useful approach for practicing improvisation as well. The strategy basically guarantees you a pathway to developing your solo. The trumpet solo in this video, Bobby Lane, shared this amazing thought with me that smaller ideas have less identity. Basically, if you play a Charlie Parker lick, most educated listeners are going to bust you on that. But if you start with a 3-note cell, such as CDG, and expand over it for, say, the first 8 to 12 bars of There Will Never Be Another You, or any standard, you're forcing yourself to create thoughtful compositional material in real time. Anyways, let's listen to this segment in context and just kind of take a bath in those 3-note cells staying the same while everything else kind of orbits around them. This next idea, the buffer before and after the solo section, is basically just more rock and roll. It's another appearance of the 3-note voicing concept, this time E, F sharp, and B, with change in context. And then, let's make it 7. I will say, I did originally hear this part in 7. I tried not to just ram things into odd meter because I'm bored. In this situation, I thought it felt natural immediately. Going forward from here, we sort of make our way through the form of the double time section again, but with space for improvisation. This section ends with a climactic ensemble section over the 7/4 material. Basically, I just felt like this idea had a lot of forward momentum, it was really strong, and I just wanted to use it to create a climax or moment. I just want to talk about structuring this piece for a second. It doesn't follow the typical route you'd see in a big band chart. And that was a conscious choice. I don't have issues with the format of a traditional big band chart, but at this point in my life, I really wanted to explore the idea of applying almost cinematic structures to my music. Basically, creating a more dynamic line graph of energy or volume or whatever, rather than a traditional intro, rising action, climax, falling action format. When we start a piece, which in my mind differs from an arrangement, we're sort of building and destroying an entire world, right? I want to create an atmosphere that will draw a listener in and have them hanging on with anticipation to see what's coming next. All we can do is either defy or play into the listener's expectations. So as a composer, it's important to be thoughtful with how we choose to address those expectations. Anyways, things in the piece begin to relax and return to the idea from the beginning. I should mention, I always name things before I write them, and I wanted to mess with this mirror image symmetry concept, hence Parallelephants. I knew from the outset that this piece would work its way back to this material. So we exit the double time section a major third higher than where the piece started. The form lent itself to that resolution, so I just followed where my ear took me. However, when we returned to the opening ideas B section, I modulated back to the original key. This was a logistical choice more than a musical one, because I wanted the section that was coming up to be in the same key, based on the ranges of the instruments in the ensemble. I knew the closing ensemble section would feature a lot of dynamic content from the lower voices, and because of that, it physically couldn't be any lower than where it already was, and if it was any higher, the low voices would lose their oomph. There's just a tiny outro on the end, which is a recap of the first thing you hear in the piece. However, it resolved from E major to B major, which feels more final when you compare it to the E major to C major resolution that you hear in this spot earlier in the piece. In my opinion, this whole piece was essentially an experiment gone right. As I write more and play more and think about music more, I keep coming back to the realization that not only does trying to be creative under limits yield interesting material, it also helps you develop your individual voice as a musician. The way your brain will instinctually problem solve its way around those limitations is exclusive and unique to you. I hope this explanation has been helpful, insightful, useful, and hopefully some of these approaches and techniques make their way into your next project. If you want full access to this score and others, please check out my Patreon page. It's going to be launched soon. Patreon subscribers can get tiered access to scores, bonus content, composition and arranging resources, private lessons, and much more. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and most of all, drop a link to your music in the comments. There are so many amazing musicians that go unheard. Let's hear it. Thanks.